Learning to see your subject as shapes will enable you to simplify your paintings and leave out unnecessary details. For example, if you can see a grove of trees as a single shape rather than individual trees and leaves and branches, then you're on the right track. Considering both negative and positive shapes will strengthen your compositions and make painting more rewarding. I'll explain this further as we look at some of my paintings later in the video. So, let's get started. Okay, since a picture is worth 1,000 words, we're going to look at some of my paintings as I explain shapes. And this is a painting I did in Venice, and what I want you to look at is how it's separated into 3 shapes. There's this shape right here under my brush that runs right along here, this whole area right here. If you squint, that kind of turns into one shape. It includes a lot of details with windows, the doorway, the water, and all of that. But that should be considered as one shape, and that's what I was thinking about when I painted it. The second shape is this one right here, where the sunlight comes through. So it's that shape right there. That's the second shape. Again, it has some details in it, but they don't detract from the main shape. The third shape is this one over here, this whole area right here. And that also contains some details and windows, this little focal point of the gondola with the gondola deer and the movement in the water. But it's those 3 shapes that I want you to look at. This one right here, this one with the light, and this one over here. If you can learn to see the painting in terms of simple shapes like that, it helps you eliminate a lot of details. It holds the painting together better, it simplifies it, and it'll work really well for you. Now, since I simplified this painting into 3 shapes, I did it first in a value study, a simple pencil drawing. But I want you to notice that each of these 3 shapes, this one, the one with the light, and this one over here, each one of those 3 shapes is different. They're not the same. They're different sizes, they're different shapes, they have a different rhythm to them, and each of the shapes in the painting like that, when you simplify it into a few shapes, you want to make sure that each of those shapes is interesting and each one of them is different. This is another example of one of my paintings called Sunset on Dakota Street, and I'm going to talk about shapes with this painting. And this painting was actually done just a few steps from my old studio. And now I only mention that because I don't want people to think they have to travel to Venice just to get a good painting. There's plenty of things right in your own neighborhood that you should find interesting. Now, in this particular painting, everything is backlit. That means the light source is behind, like this church, the cars, the apartment buildings over here, the trees, the utility poles. The light source is behind all that. That's called backlighting, and that really simplifies things into nice shapes. So this church, with all its windows and everything else, just turns into one dark shape, a really interesting shape too. So when I was figuring out the composition, which I did up here in this pencil drawing, I reduced this just to 3 values, white, a middle value, and a dark value. So I could simplify the shapes, and you can see there's one shape coming over here, running into the church, coming behind the cars and across the painting. So there's one main shape that unifies the whole painting. Now the little cars down here, those are shapes unto themselves in kind of a middle value. The apartment building over here is very simplified because of the backlighting. And the same way with the trees over here are simplified beautifully just because of that backlighting. Even this utility pole right here, which becomes an important part of the composition, is simplified because it's lit from the back, so you don't see any details on it. Now the reason I like to do a pencil drawing like this, which is called a value study, is I can work all these things out ahead of time before I do the painting. That way I can see if the shapes are where I want them. Would it be more interesting to move them left or right, up and down, anything like that. How many little cars to put in, how much to emphasize things like the trees, the utility poles. Those are all easier to figure out because I'm seeing them simply as shapes. Even the clouds up here, which illuminate the sunset, are just a couple simple shapes. And you should study your subject if you're doing a landscape, if you have the opportunity to study it in different times of the day. Like this is a totally different setup in the morning and the afternoon. The reason I chose it at this time of the day, right in the evening, is because of the backlighting. So if you can study your subject at different times of the day, early morning, late evening, different parts of the day, and also different seasons. You know, there aren't any leaves on these trees because it's in the spring. Before the leaves came out, you know, there could be snow on the ground if you did it in the winter. So studying at different times of the day and different season is really important, and it gives you a chance to look for different shapes. This is another painting of mine, which I'm going to talk about shapes on, and it's called In the Artist's Garden. It was actually painted in Rod Goebel's garden down in Taos, New Mexico. Rod being another really well-known artist from that part of the country. The reason I chose this painting, it's a little painting, but I want to show you these blue shapes right here, these delphiniums, should be looked at as one shape. And they're there mainly to show off these white flowers and the details in the front of the painting. Now these delphiniums have shadow and light on each one of them, light and shadow. But if you squint, you can see that all of those together as one shape. And if you think of it that way, it's much easier to organize the painting into an interesting composition. So the point of this shape here in the background is mainly to show off these white flowers. Now look behind the blue delphiniums into the background. That is considered another shape. Now it has some tree trunks in it and a few other little details, but I considered that area as one shape, and that was just to simplify things behind the delphiniums. The white flowers themselves, each one of those is a separate shape, and each one of those is different. This one being the most dominant shape among the white flowers, then this one, which is a little bit smaller, has a little more paint in it, and then these back here, which kind of get lost into the middle and background. So when you're working with shapes, it's a way to simplify things in your paintings, simplify your compositions. It helps you organize the painting, and think about things like these white flowers. Each one of those is a different shape with a little bit different color in them, a little bit different placement, that sort of thing. The blue shapes back here in the delphiniums, the same thing. Each one of the delphiniums is a little bit different as they merge into one larger shape. This is another painting of mine, a little study I did on location. It's called Taos Adobe, and I want to talk about shapes again. If you look at this painting, this adobe right here, which runs down here behind the little man through the gate and across, if you think of that as one shape, going from left to right all the way across the painting, it really simplifies things. Just for now, ignore little details like these posts up here, the window, the gate, and so forth, and think of this as one shape running from left to right. And that way you can figure out where to place it in the composition, how much sky you want to use, how much ground you want to use, how much space you want to take up with that big shape. Now there are details on it, the windows, the rocks, the gate, but ignore that for now and think of this as one shape. Then if you think of the ground, the foreground here, ignoring these little rock details, and think of that as one shape, and then the sky up here is another shape, then again you have three main big shapes: the adobe building, the foreground, and the sky. So you look for an interesting arrangement of those three shapes, and then you'll have a better composition. And then you can put in things like the little figure here next to the gate to create a focal point. This dark shape behind him really brings out the head and shoulders of the figure. And then these trees over here, these two trees, are just two simple shapes without really any details in them. So the more you see shapes, the easier it is to simplify your painting, organize the composition, and end up with something that you like. This is another one of my paintings from a painting trip I took to New England, and this was actually from a small lake in Harrisville, New Hampshire. And the name of the painting is Serenity, and I chose it because I want to talk about shapes again. So if you look at this area of the painting where the trees are reflected in the water, this area right here, think of that as one shape. Now it has a little bit of blue in here where the water comes in between the tree shapes. It has some lights and darks and golds from the autumn trees, things like that. But it still should be looked at as one shape. Now the next shape is the boat and the boat's reflection in the water. You should think of that as one shape. The boat and the reflection together, making up one shape. Now, as the boat is reflected into the water, there's a little more color in it. It's not as bright white as it is up here on the actual boat. But if you can think of that as one shape, it's much easier to paint it, and it's much easier to understand it in the context of the composition. Now, down here, the lighter area of water, where the trees are not reflected into it. This area right here, some of which is pure white paper, think of that as another shape. So now we have the trees up here as one shape, the boat and the boat reflection as the second shape, and this area of lighter water down here as the third shape, leaving this dock over here with the sunstruck part of it on the top, middle value on the side, and a darker value under it. If you think of that as one shape also, then you have four shapes in the painting. This one back here with the tree reflections, the boat reflection, the lighter area of water right here, and this area where the dock is. That's the four shapes. If you can learn to see paintings that way, it makes composing that much easier. It'll make your compositions more interesting, and it makes the painting that much easier to deal with. And also, if you think of shapes like the boat and the boat reflection as one shape, it's much easier to leave out a lot of details and just get down to the essentials. Now, another thing I want to point out, this line right along here, which is a broken line between the dark area of the water and the light area of the water, here and here, here and here. If you look at this separation between the two, it's really a broken edge. It's another way of creating a soft edge with all these different parts in it. That makes it more interesting than just a slash across there. But it still separates it into just two shapes. Another thing I want to point out on this painting is this shape, which is the boat and the reflection together as one shape. Up here, there are harder edges on the actual edge of the boat. As it comes down here into the water, the reflection turns into much more of a broken, softer edge. But still, the whole thing together should be considered as one shape. I cover a lot of information in these videos, and you won't use all of it in every single painting. However, the more you understand, the more you can pick and choose as to what to use in each painting. And things like reducing the composition into shapes, eliminating some of the details becomes really helpful. So practice reducing your subject matter into simple shapes. Just a few major shapes. If you can do it that way, it will really help you organize your paintings and come up with better compositions, and it will help you eliminate unnecessary details. So this is Dennis Pendleton saying until next time, keep on painting.